Welcome to part 2 of my video on The Millionaire and the Showgirl, the life of Marion Davies. She was gorgeous, she had everything, including the love of a very wealthy man, but in the end, it didn't make her happy. Let's find out why. I'm sorry, it was called St. Donat's Castle in Britain, and I mean, it was a real castle, but it's kind of fixer-upper, according to her, so he had to spend trillions and trillions of dollars to fix it up, and it was a gift to Marion. So she not only had this other castle over here in California, she had an actual real medieval castle over here in Europe at her disposal. And I'm thinking, no wonder this guy actually ended up going bankrupt at one point, because when he was a child, he was touring the Louvre. He told his mom, how come we can't buy the Louvre? I want to buy the Louvre. So that gives you an idea of how much art he collected. Basically, Hearst Castle and St. Donat's Castle and the biggest mansion in Beverly Hills still that hasn't been broken up. He owned that. We're talking about the mansion that was used in the famous horse scene in The Godfather. They owned that mansion, and that's one of the largest estates in the entire of Beverly Hills, still not broken up. Okay, he had this massive art collection. They were stored away in warehouses all over the place, and basically these estates that he had served as showpieces for a small amount of this artwork, because there's no way you could display all of it unless you built at least 20 museums, which he didn't do. I don't think he built a single museum, except now we have Hearst Castle, but I don't think he built it as a museum. But yeah, why doesn't he like Rockefeller or something? Why didn't he build a Metropolitan Museum of Art or something like that? I don't know. Or like Getty. Anyway, back to Marion. Marion had a little alcoholic problem. Hearst knew it. Hearst tried to keep it under control. This is one of the reasons that he didn't allow anybody to bring their own booze when they came to Hearst Castle. He strictly forbid it, okay? You couldn't bring your own booze when you came to Hearst Castle. Some people, like David Niven and people like that, managed to hide away their booze, Tyrone Power, but for the most part, you weren't allowed to bring your own booze. But Marion Davies always had booze stashed away in the ladies' room off of the main dining area and the main salon. And so she'd invite her women friends to come and join her into the ladies' room, and they drink a bunch of booze. Hearst is not a teetotaler. Okay, he did drink, but it was at very specific times and under very specific conditions. And this is what all of his guests had to do as well. At 7 p.m., everyone who was invited to Hearst Castle was together in the Grand Salon, and that was cocktail hour, and you were allowed exactly 2 cocktails. This is just like that cantina at Disneyland. 2 drinks, no more, even though you're paying $30 a drink, okay? So yeah, 2 cocktails, no more. And then you were allowed to go into the dining room and have wine with your dinner. Only 1 glass of wine with your dinner, okay? And that was it. This was done so that Marion wouldn't get drunk, but she did anyway, because she had her booze stashed all over that place, including the ladies' room, okay? She was an alcoholic. The worse her career got. And of course, because talkies were coming in, there wasn't any way Marion was going to cut it with talkies, because she had a stutter, and she never really overcame that stutter, even though Hearst spent tons of money on vocal coaches and trying to better her in that regard. She never got rid of the stutter. It was just always there. It's okay. Hearst loved her anyway. Okay, so they did really want to get married, but of course, the other showgirl that he married, Millicent, wasn't having any of that. And Millicent, since she was the first wife, she was viewed as the legitimate wife. I mean, since she was the only wife, and in the eyes of Hearst's mother, Phoebe. Phoebe had all the money at this time. Hearst was an only child, so he should be inheriting all the money, unless Phoebe didn't like something Hearst did, like get a divorce and marry Marion, because she adored Millicent. So she basically told Millicent, I'm going to assure that you never get a divorce from my son, because if he divorces you, he will not get a penny from this estate, not a dime. I'll leave it all to you and your children. Hearst knew that. So essentially, he chose his money over legitimizing his relationship with Marion, which I'm sure really hurt her. I'm sure she understood, well, we wouldn't be living like kings and queens if I got a divorce. Looks like we'd probably just be slumming it. Whatever, I'm sure, yeah. Anyway, at one point, Hearst became just about bankrupt. And yeah, Marion was forced to sell many of the jewels that he had given her, and he's lavished her with so many jewels. She was forced to sell many of those jewels and hand him about $1 million, and this was in the 40s. And that was a lot of money in the 40s. But he did end up paying her back. But by then, the heyday and the good times were waning for both Hearst and Marion. Hearst's health began to fail. Marion was no longer a movie star. She was no longer in films. She never made the talkies. Hearst Castle would never be finished. It's still to this day not finished. If you go, you'll see the unfinished parts of it. It was a work in progress right up until the day that both Marion and William Randolph Hearst left the castle. They had to leave because of Hearst's health. I'm going to read this part that's from my page, Tragic Hollywood, Beautiful, Glamorous, and Dead. Since the early 20s, there's been a speculation that Davies and Hearst had a child together. And sometime between 1920 and 1923. The child was rumored to be Patricia Lake Van Cleve, who was publicly identified as Davies' niece. On October 3rd, 1993, Lake died of complications from lung cancer in Indian Wells, California. 10 hours before her death, Lake requested that her son publicly announce that she was not Davies' niece, but Davies' biological daughter, whom she had conceived with Hearst. Lake had never commented on her alleged paternity in public, even after Hearst and Davies' death, but did tell her grown children and friend. Lake's claim was published in her death notice, which was published in the newspapers. So yes, Hearst and Davies did have a child. Back then, they couldn't openly claim paternity of the child because they were not married. So he sent Davies off to Paris to give birth to the child. And then they brought the child back and let her sister, whose own child had died, raise the child as her own. So that's what happened back then. And Hearst only acknowledged that he was her father on Patricia's wedding day. Davies told her when she was 11, but Hearst didn't fess up to it until she was getting married on her wedding day. Patricia Lake married the guy that played Dagwood in the Dagwood movies, and both him and her and Marion are all buried together in this one big tomb. See example at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which was just the Hollywood Cemetery, I think, when they were buried there. So you might recognize that tomb. If you ever watch Dexter, it shows up in a couple of episodes of Dexter, actually. And that's the tomb that he goes in and out of when he's looking for somebody. Anyway, yes, Hollywood Forever Cemetery has a lot of stars, and that cemetery is often photographed and shows up in a lot of television series. So as I said, they were forced to leave Hearst Castle in the late 40s, and they never returned to their beloved Shangri-La on the hill. Hearst's health wouldn't permit it. They moved into the mansion in Beverly Hills, both he and Marion Davies. Millicent was not okay with any of this, but she tolerated this as long as he kept her on the West Coast and didn't bring her to the East Coast. And she would say, the West Coast is hers and the East Coast is mine, okay? It's good that they have enough mansions and shit to go around like that for everybody to have their own space. So, yeah. So her health declined further when he was at the mansion in Beverly Hills. And he died on August 14th, 1951. He left 51% of his estate to Marion Davies. What a slap in the face to his wife and kids, right? 51% to her. You know what she did? Did she go on a shopping spree? Did she go and buy a house in Europe somewhere? No, she gave all but $1 back. And this was after his children, his sons, had kicked her out of the mansion as soon as William Randolph breathed his last. They literally hauled her out of the mansion, kicked her out. Now, there could be a couple of reasons for this. I don't think she had the stomach for a long, drawn-out legal battle. I don't think she had the money for a long, drawn-out legal battle. She had made some pretty savvy investment choices, namely that cirrhosis on the beach house that Hearst had also had built for her. This massive, looks like the White House sitting on the sands of Malibu, where apparently some pretty wild things went down. Anyway, yeah. He gave her that. He deeded her that. So that was hers, free and clear. But I think she'd also made real estate investments up and down Beverly Hills. This is before Beverly Hills was really the big deal that it is now. So she was okay. She wasn't like, it's not like she was penniless, but I don't think she had the stomach for a legal fight with the Hearst family. So, yeah. She was a little bit rudderless. She dedicated her whole life to this man, everything. She did it. She gave up her career. She gave up a legitimate life with a husband. She gave up children, essentially, to be with this man and to take care of this man. Once he was gone, she found herself adrift. Her alcoholism increased. I think within less than a year, she married again. His name it was 11 weeks. It was 11 weeks. And one day after Hearst's death, she married a man named Horace Brown. He resembled Hearst, but he was much younger than Marion when Hearst was much older. So they were married in Las Vegas. At the time of her death, she was filing for divorce. I think she'd filed for divorce twice, and she always canceled it. I don't think this was a particularly happy marriage, but she never did cancel it. Davies made her last public appearance on January 10th, 1960, on an NBC television special called Head of Hopper's Hollywood. Joseph P. Kennedy rented Davis's mansion and worked from behind the scenes to secure his son John F. Kennedy's nomination during the 1960 Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. She was diagnosed with stomach cancer, and she died this week, September 22nd, in 1961. She was 64 years old when she died, but she looked much, much older. So that's kind of the sad story. One of the saddest pictures is her walking back from being in Clark Gable's funeral. That's one of the last pictures I saw of her. Very sad, defeated, lost woman. Very lonely. Yeah, it was very sad. So that's a sad story of Marion Davies. I hope you enjoyed today's Star of the Week. And do all the things, like, subscribe, check out my books, leave a comment. Have you ever heard of Marion Davies? I've actually read her biography. Have you read her autobiography? I read her autobiography. You know where I got it? I got it at Hearst Castle. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, they used to not talk about her on the tours. Now they actually talk about her. But in the early days, it was forbidden to mention Marion's name when you took these tours. Even though the whole place was built for her, you couldn't talk about her. Okay. All right. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much for liking and subscribing, and thank you if you've made it this far. It really means a lot to me. Thank you so much. Bye.